Namaste everyone, and welcome to the Students and the Environment. This week, we are privileged to have two expert speakers, not just one. But before we like to begin, we would like to start with the Gayatri Mantra. So wherever you are, please do join and take the time to enter into the right frame of mind to commence today's learning. Om 𝑚𝑉𝑦 𝑺𝑗 तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात्. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Brilliant. Today, we will be discussing the topic of the environment. And one of the reasons for this is that it was actually Environmental Day last week. This week, we are going to be looking at how Hindu Dharma relates to the environment and how we as modern day Hindus can encompass this into our lives. Whilst we are discussing this, we really do encourage you all at home on Facebook to like and share as much as possible. And please do use the comment section. Let us know what you're thinking, but more importantly, drop in questions for our esteemed speakers. We will be selecting them throughout and posing them to the speakers. And if we don't manage to get through all of them, then hopefully we will be answering them afterwards. I'd like to take a moment to introduce the two guests working in this field. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome firstly Gopalji. He's based in New York and he's the director of the 𝑻𝑯𝑬 project, which is part of the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies. He is co-chair of the UN Multi-Faith Advisory Council. He's got a master's in digital culture and humanities from King's, and he has a BSc in computing from Oxford Brookes. Secondly, I'd like to say big thank you and welcome to Harshji Thakur, who is the co-founder of the Good Plate company. He works as an electric mobility product manager at Shell. He is a graduate in PPE from the University of Manchester, and he's also the ex-president of NHSF Manchester Hindu Society. And today, representing our students is myself, Milan Nakum. So namaste all. I'm from the University of Sheffield and graduated in chemistry last year. And I'm part of the London Zone campus team on the National Committee of NHSF. And we also have Davina with us. And she's just finished studying at the University of Reading in economics and politics. And she is on the National Finance team. So we will be discussing till about 7:30, and then we'll be taking questions and answers from our Facebook comment section until about 7:40. And we'll have some final takeaways for you all. So with that, let's begin, and I'll hand over to Davina.
Thank you very much, Milan. So first question I'd like to ask to our guests is, you have spent so much time working within the field of the environment, and we'd really love to know a bit more about how you got involved and why, the topic of the environment is so important.
I'll go first. Cool. Namaste everyone, and thanks for having me on. So for me, I graduated about 5 years ago now from Manchester, and I think similar to a lot of you guys, when I started at university, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do afterwards, and thought I was going to go into politics. Part of me wanted to go into consultancy, and other parts of me was quite strongly wanted to do something around social impact, but it was still quite an unknown thing. And then for me, the decision to really want to pursue something quite intently around sustainability was a conscious choice, and really partly driven by the fact that I wanted to do something which had social impact. Then the question is what, and then it was a really practical thing around from a career development point of view and what really excites me. And I think I'm very biased, but in my opinion, there is nothing as exciting as energy and the environment, on the basis that everything that we do from every part of our lives is so impacted by energy systems, climate systems, and almost any field of expertise that you want to go into in some way will touch it. And so, you know, as we kind of talk later during this session, I'll give a bit more background as to kind of my journey within this. But for me, it was really around where can I have the most impact, and really what drives and excites me, which has a social impact as well. And really, yeah, sustainability and energy ticked all those boxes, and yeah, I've never looked back.
Yeah, good morning. Well, good afternoon from New York, and good evening to all of you there in England. I should say that I live in New York, but I was born and raised in the UK. I was born in Leeds and grew up in Watford, and I was just recently in England for about 2 months on lockdown at my parents' place. I'm just recently back here in New York City. My journey has been interesting and challenging at times. A little bit like Hershey, I also wanted to make an impact and make a positive difference in the world. The way I went about it was after I finished my studies, I moved into an ashram. I moved into the 𝑻𝑯𝑬 temple in Watford, and I lived there as a brahmachari monk for about a year or so. And before that, I'd lived as a monk in India for a year also. So I had about 2 years of brahmachari monk training under my belt. And then when I left that world, I asked a friend and mentor of mine, what should I do? I tried to be a monk. I couldn't do it, but I still want to make a positive difference in the world and help people. And at that time, the 𝑚𝑯𝑬 project, which is a Hindu environmental initiative, was literally just starting. And so my friend and mentor asked me to join the first meeting of that back in early 2009, and NHSF was there at that meeting as well. It was a small meeting in Oxford. And that was 10 years ago, or over 10 years ago now. And since then, I've been the director of the 𝑚𝑯𝑬 project, pretty much in a full-time capacity, working with Hindu groups and leaders internationally on environmental issues. And for me, you know, my understanding of Hinduism is that we are here to help and serve each other and to love God. And by loving God, that means to help other people in a very active way, not just through sentiment, but through action. And so if we see that the earth is suffering, if we see other people are suffering, as a Hindu, it should be a natural response to help relieve and stop that suffering as much as possible. And so that's why I do this, and that's why I think it's important. I think for every Hindu, to see suffering should be painful for us, and we should all try and do what we can to stop that. And it's very clear at this moment that the earth has been suffering for many, many years, for centuries now, if not longer, and that we have a responsibility and a duty to help stop that suffering.
Thank you very much. Reflecting on what you said, Gopalji, around the earth kind of suffering, how did we get to this point? How have we let earth, you know, our one place where we live, kind of end up in this situation now where it's, you know, spoke about all over the news pretty much?
Yeah, it's a good and important question. It's a long answer, but like the brief version is that essentially since the late 1800s, since the Industrial Revolution, which started in the UK, essentially started in the Midlands, I think, you know, the world has adopted a model of economic development, which comes at the cost of the environment. And so for centuries, for thousands of years, humanity has looked at the earth and nature in different ways. We've looked at the natural world as a threat. We've looked at it as a place of beauty, as a place of, you know, that inspires romance. But really around the Industrial Revolution in the West, we started looking at the natural world as a place to exploit for human upliftment. And what that meant is that we started to pollute our rivers, to start chopping down our trees, and critically started to exploit the earth for her natural resource, oil. And because of our addiction and our greed to fossil fuels, that has resulted in the climate crisis which we see today. Because as we burn fossil fuels, carbon dioxide goes up into the atmosphere, it blocks in the heat, and the planet warms. That's the global warming effect. And so our whole economy, not just in the West, but now internationally, in India, in Africa, in South America, the whole global economy is based on the extraction and the use of fossil fuels. And so when the whole world is doing that, it's only natural and reasonable that the earth is going to suffer, because we are taking something from her that doesn't belong to us and using it in a way which is causing her harm.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was very insightful. And kind of reflecting again on what you said about the Industrial Revolution, actually, I'll ask 𝑚𝑯𝑬, who do you think is the biggest contributor to this crisis? Is there even one?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's an important, good question, and I think 𝑚𝑯𝑬 gave a really good summary there. And I think just to add to that as well, before we try and point some fingers, which is always nice, but I think this concept of how we got to where we are, I think we see it in our everyday lives, right? It's this concept of, called the tragedy of the commons. Like we see, we walk past a plastic bottle on the floor and we decide to pick it up, we don't pick it up. We go to the supermarket, we buy, we buy peppers in a plastic wrap, or we buy it loose. I mean, those things in themselves hasn't led to where we are today, but it's those kind of micro decisions that we kind of make on a day-to-day level, which, if I throw this plastic away in the bin, actually doesn't really have an impact on me because I don't see where that goes next. But actually it's the wider impact that has on everybody else and us as a collective that we don't see. And that's really what's perpetuated at a much more of a micro scale. And as 𝑚𝑯𝑬 alluded to, I mean, you look at the Industrial Revolution, that was precisely the tragedy of the commons at a macro scale, where you've got every single industry in every single country commoditizing the environment, but really looking at it from their point of view and not looking at the wider picture and the impact it has on everybody else. And so who is to blame? It sounds cliche, but it really is all of us to some extent. I mean, I'm biased. When we say, 𝑚𝑯𝑬 mentioned fossil fuel burning, I mean, I work for Shell, one of the biggest contributors, you could argue, over the past 50 or so years kind of towards this. But actually, you look at demand and supply, industries don't produce things people don't want. And so partly it's a byproduct of development, economic development. But again, I think it's a level of blind economic development, and we've all got to take responsibilities of not having gone sustainably as we went through the development crisis. And I think we're now really at a crossroads, which makes it, again, from my point of view, and sure from 𝑚𝑯𝑬's point of view, it's frightening, but it's also quite an exciting time to be in this space, because we are at a real crossroads. And I think all of those people that we can point fingers to, whether it's governments, our individuals, businesses, everybody's really now starting to really pipe up and go beyond just PR marketing stunts and really feel that actually they need to do something about this.
Yeah, perfect. I think that's very, very insightful, and it's very true. I think, it's our responsibility now, and that's why we're trying to, actively encourage people to get involved. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you both for that. Just picking up on something, 𝑚𝑯𝑬, what you said is that it's a kind of a Hindu's responsibility to actually look after others who are suffering and look after the earth that it is suffering, and we know it is. But where does this kind of stem from? Where does this originate from in our philosophy, really? And just on those two things, I've heard the terms ahimsa and bhumimata as well a lot. Could you try and bring those in as well in your answer?
Yeah, sure. And those are the two kind of, it's not so much the words, but it's the concepts that those words convey, right? So ahimsa, so in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about this planet. He says in Sanskrit, he says this planet is dukkalayam asashvatam. He says this planet, this earth, is a place of suffering. And that suffering, we only suffer if we're suffering violence or harm, right? If there's no violence or there's no harm, then we don't suffer. So suffering and pain and misery is part of the fabric, is part of the DNA of the creation of the earth, right? We can't get away from that. And so Hinduism teaches that suffering is all around us, right? And so as a Hindu, our responsibility is to minimize the suffering that we cause, right? Minimize the suffering we cause on ourselves, minimize the suffering we cause on other people, and minimize the suffering we cause on the natural world and other living beings such as plants and animals. And that's a very powerful teaching, that we had to lead a life of minimizing the suffering of others, right? We live in a world right now where it's all about me, 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 It's like, how can I be happy? How can I be successful? How can I be wealthy? How can I look good on TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is? But the starting point for Hinduism is like, how can I not harm other people? How can I not harm the earth? That's a really profound shift in the way that Hinduism asks us to think and behave. And then that's coupled with this teaching, which is exemplified by Bhumata, that the earth is a living being, that the earth is a goddess, 𝑻𝑯𝑬 𝑬𝑵𝑽𝑰𝑹𝑶𝑵𝑵𝑴𝑬𝑚. And this is throughout Hinduism. The rivers are sacred, the trees are sacred, the mountains are sacred. Again, in the Gita, Krishna says that all life is equal, right? And we have these external coverings of a man or a woman or a cow or a dog or a tree, but within each of them is the same spiritual essence, that same Atma, the same spiritual spark that emanates from the divine, right? And so if we're all equal in the eyes of God from the spiritual perspective, we have no right to harm anybody else or anything else, because their right to life and their right to happiness is just the same as ours. And by saying that everything is sacred, we personify everything. It's easy to harm something if you don't give it a face and a name, right? But as soon as, like, if you had a dog, why do we give our dogs names? Is because we want to give them personality, right? And we want to say, hey, Rover, hey, whatever, you know? And like, that's why we give animals names. That's why we give people names, because everyone is an individual, right? So as soon as you personify something, your ability to cause harm decreases, because you can't cause harm to something that has a name, that has a personality, that has a face. And so Hinduism says that everything is sacred, everything is spiritual, and the earth itself, Bhumi Mata, is a goddess who is worthy of our love and respect, just as everybody else is.
Wow. Thank you for that, Gopalji. That was awesome. That was an awesome explanation. And I just want to pick up on, you just kind of flipped how we all think, from selfish to selfless, essentially. And then I guess I just want to post to Harshji on does that link into the word that we use quite broadly in the sense of dharma and philosophy for Hindus?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right. And I think dharma, in a sense, is a relative term to each and every one of us, right? Like, what is the dharma that what is my dharma in this? And one of the I'm sure we've all heard it before, but one of the quotes in our scriptures, this idea of the world is one family, 𝑉asudhaiva kutumbakam. I think that's, for me, one of the most powerful things, which also drives me, in the sense, again, kind of, you want to link that to practically what we're seeing in the world today. This, again, going back to this idea of the tragedy of commons. I mean, this is beautifully put, right? Like, if the world is really one family, and my action today is not, I'm not really going to see any impact of it, actually. And none of us in the West will probably see much impact from environmental fallout for many, many years, but actually we're seeing it already in other parts of the world. So actually, how do we really change our living, our way of life, and actually how we influence each other, even though we're not going to see the benefits of it or any difference of it immediately? And I think that's where you being driven by these kind of principles of 𝑉asudhaiva kutumbakam becomes really, really powerful. And yeah, I think that's really the essence of it.
Wow, thank you very much, Harshji. Yeah, I just want to say that quote that you said from one of our scriptures, 𝑉asudhaiva kutumbakam. Hopefully everyone's seen one of those posts on our medias, especially on the back of what's happened recently. So yeah, thanks for bringing that in. Davina?
Perfect. So yeah, thank you very much for shedding some light on how this ties into Hindu Dharma. And it makes a lot more sense to me now. So now that we have this knowledge from our Hindu teachings, how can we then turn this into practice? I know, Gopalji, we just recently spoke about the Bhumi Mata. Could you maybe start telling us about I know you mentioned it already, but could you maybe give us a bit more detail about the Bhumi project and what you do and why?
Sure. So as I mentioned, the Bhumi project, we've been around for 10 years now, and we've worked with, and we do work with all the major Hindu organizations and leaders internationally. And, our work has changed over time as we've seen the environmental crisis change and come into more public focus. We've done a lot of work with temples and greening of temples. We actually produced the first ever Hindu green temple guide in consultation with over 30 temples in India. We worked with all the major pilgrimage sites in India. But more recently, we're kind of focusing a little bit more now on like policy. And at the moment, actually, part of our work is around green finance and what they call the green recovery. And so as we're in the middle of the pandemic right now and just emerging from the pandemic, there's this concern that economic recovery is going to come at the cost of the natural world. And so the discourse in the environmental movement is, how do we build back better? And so we're doing some work right now around Hindu green finance. So if you're a Hindu and you invest your money, how are you investing your money in green and sustainable ways, right? And how that trickles down on the individual level as a student or as a young professional is, where are you putting your money, right? They say money talks. So are you investing in sustainable companies? Are you buying your clothing from companies that treat people ethically? Are you, investing in fossil fuel companies or airline companies, or are you buying a bicycle and riding around? And so that's kind of the work we're doing right now, is the concept of green recovery or sustainable lifestyles or sustainable consumption. How to make small individual changes in your day-to-day life, which cumulatively have a bigger impact when combined with everybody else doing the same work.
So thank you very much for that. And now I'd like to just bring in Harshji, and kind of, could you maybe explain the Good Plate Company and what brought you, to start considering working within that kind of area?
Yeah, sure. So kind of, again, just going back to kind of when I graduated, where I went, and, part of my decision when I wanted to work in environmental space, it was, where can I have the most impact? And I thought working within a corporate environment and trying to make a change from within, it was really, really something I was driven by. And actually, before I kind of move on to the Good Plate Company, I think important to say, like, doing what I do now within Shell, for example, work within what we call the new energies team. I mean, 10 years ago, the opportunity to do something like that within a fossil fuel company would have been unheard of. And I think, again, that's kind of testament to the level and the kind of opportunities there are for students as well, that, again, if they set the right intent to wanting to go into that space. And so, yeah, I mean, I graduated, joined Shell, and been working kind of within the electric mobility space within our new energies team. And then, again, like I'm sure many people on this call, it was a desire to wanting to do more. And, everyone's got a side hustle nowadays, and everybody wants to start a business. And I was quite adamant, again, I'd set the intent at university that whatever I did had to have some kind of a social impact, and that social impact I wanted to be around the environment. And hence, we saw this opportunity and we thought, how can we change behaviors around plastic use? And we see every day, we go to Mondays and we go to Indian weddings, and the amount of plastic cutlery and the plates, and it's actually quite sickening, the amount of stuff you see thrown away at the end of a wedding, for example. And it was a small change that myself and Raghav, again, ex-NHF, NAPCOM and ex-Manchester president, we thought, actually, why don't we provide an alternative, and then people have no excuse. So that's what the Good Plate Company is about, really. What we do is embracing the circular economy, and so providing plates and bowls and cutlery really made from agricultural waste. So our plates are made from areca leaves, so Gujarati called sobari, the leaves from those trees, so it's byproduct of agricultural waste. And also sugarcane, so byproduct of producing sugarcane, so we sell that. And we've also now started to investigate kind of zero waste. So again, I think and I think this is important for students as well, around seeing your end-to-end impact, right? So if you start a business, whatever it is, let's say you start selling, I don't know, jewelry or something, I think you've got to take responsibility across the entire supply chain as to, when I sell something or produce something, what impact does that have across the wider supply chain? And for us, the Good Plate Company, it was, well, great, people use our stuff, but what happens when you throw it away? You're still having an impact on the environment. And so what we started to look at is zero waste festivals. So how can we work with organizations and organizers that they can use our products, but actually use it responsibly? So we also take accountability of, after somebody's used it, we are also responsible for making sure that then ends up back into the earth where it belongs. So yeah, that's a bit about the Good Plate Company.
Amazing, thank you so much. Both of them projects sound absolutely incredible. And Harshji, could you maybe give some examples of what students could do to get kind of involved within the kind of environmental issues that we're having at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, start with educating yourselves, right? I think the problem is big. We are, one of the facts I've come across recently, there's loads of facts, won't bore you with it, but one of the things that really kind of struck out to me, so everyone's probably heard of the 2015 Paris Agreement that was set around, reducing or setting a target of 2 degrees warming this century. For us to hit that, we need to reduce our emissions by just over 7% every single year. This year, in COVID year, where we've literally locked down our transport systems, I think we're about 5.5%. So even in a year like this year, we're still way off where we need to be. And I think that's why I encourage students to learn and really educate yourself on the issue, but actually do more than the individual, like do more than just recycle. I think taking some responsibility and becoming environmental leaders, and it doesn't mean you go and have to dedicate yourself, working in the green space, but if you're becoming a doctor, if you're going to go into nursing, I think really try and set the intent of how can I make a systems change within the system that I operate in, and start from there. So very practically, I think there's a book I'm just finished reading, and you've heard about it, but it's called The Uninhabitable Earth, and I'm sure Gopalji read it as well, but this is a really good starting point just to understand how much deep stuck we're in, but actually the opportunities there are still available to us, which I find really, really exciting. And there's plenty of podcasts out there. I mean, there is no excuse for ignorance, I think, on this topic.
Wow, I'm definitely going to give that book a read. Thank you very much. And over to you, Milind.
Yeah, Harshji, Gopalji, thank you very much. Just even hearing about, your drive to make a social impact, hopefully will motivate a lot of students listening on. It's definitely going to motivate me to actually educate myself a bit more on the issue. I just wanted to expand on, Harshji, what you were talking on. You brought up the stat of about 5.5% for this year. And, we've seen that lockdown has brought about a lot of pollution has kind of gone down in a lot of areas. I'm sure you've seen the news stories and Instagram posts of the nicer areas looking a little bit fresher. But, during this reduced economy, things have gone swimmingly, or at least pretty well. But, what's going to happen after all this, after COVID-19 and coronavirus? Where do you think the environment is going to be affected the most? And I guess just in the future, how is the drive to get the economy back up and running going to affect it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm really interested in Gopalji's answer on this as well. So I'll give my view, but I'll try and be short. So I think you go both ways, right? And if you look at some very practical things that have come out last week, like for example, Germany have just encouraged students, particularly economics, politics students are interested in this, but like Germany have just released their kind of green recovery stimulus, and you could read it. I mean, it's really quite staggering how much focus they put on a green recovery and the amount of money that's going into it. And so that makes me optimistic. On the other hand, you look at what's happening in the US and to some extent in China. I think there's a real danger that we lose focus and we again go back to prioritizing economic growth without actually having that focus on sustainability. So yeah, I mean, post-COVID, I think it could go both ways. But again, as students, for you guys, I think in a way, there's never been a more exciting time to really get stuck into the environmental space. I mean, from a business side, the amount of money and investment and opportunity going into this area, because everybody has to, even if they're pretending, they have to put money to pretending that they're doing something. I think that creates opportunities, particularly for you students. So yeah, I'm more optimistic than I am pessimistic about a green recovery.
Yeah, it's a really important question, and I echo a lot of what Hirsch was saying. I think, you know, at the international level, you see certain countries such as Germany, the EU, really putting an emphasis on a green recovery and investing in green industries and so on. But then obviously you have here the US, which is not in a good state at the moment in various ways, and then you got the China, England or the UK could kind of go. I think it could kind of go either way. With Brexit was always going to, you know, mean an economic hit, and it was hard to go green in good times. So in bad times, you know, that decision takes real moral courage and leadership. On the individual level, I think Hinduism teaches that in any crisis, there's an opportunity to step up and serve and be a better person and help others. And so again, echoing Hirsch, that for students, now is the time to really consider kind of what impact do we want to make on the world, right? Lockdown has forced us all to retreat from our day-to-day normality and really re-examine and think about what's the purpose of life? Like, you know, what does it mean to have a good, healthy, wholesome life where I'm happy and spiritually nourished, right? I think that's a question, and those questions we're all asking of ourselves. And so I think in this moment, as we emerge from the lockdown, I think all of us should kind of take a pause and think, how do I want to respond to this moment, right? There's definitely a global shift and a global transition happening, both in terms of the environment, but in terms of consciousness, right? And Hinduism talks a lot about elevating your consciousness to be a better person, to live in sattva gun, in the mode of goodness, to be a healthy, happy person, to help others. And so I think for students, let's step back. Let's think about the decisions we've made in the past. Let's re-examine what we thought our lives were going to look like and see, you know what, maybe there's another way of doing things. Maybe there's a better way of doing things. And for a long time, going back to the earlier question of like, how did this all start, or why has it taken so long? This is so embedded in our DNA, this idea that the natural world is there for us to exploit. You know, we've grown up with it and it's been around for centuries. And we really need to push back against that. And I think as young Hindu students and future leaders of society, it's our responsibility to push back against those norms that we've been told, you know, from before we were born, and think about, you know, I need to do things differently because my dharma, my Hindu identity teaches me that the world is sacred, the world is a gift from God, and I need to do everything I can to protect her for future generations. And so that's a responsibility on all of us. So I'm optimistic like Hirsch, because the responsibility is on the shoulders primarily of young people. What we say and do will affect the global policy makers and decision makers. So it's up to us to kind of raise our voices and lead our lives in a way that we want the world to go.
Well, thank you very much, Gopalji and Harshi, for your insights into that. Genuinely mind-boggling. We are now going to, well, yeah, it's now that time of the day where we open up to Facebook questions in our comments section. So without further ado, we have a question from Avnish Mistry, and he's asked, do we not need further economic and technological development before we get the ability to truly sustainably replace fossil fuels? And then he goes on to say, if not, how? You know, what can be done to reduce the harm of its uses?
Yeah, I mean, I can maybe start. I mean, it's a good question. Do we need more economic and technology development? I mean, I don't think we need more economic development. I think we've had a good run, and we will continue to grow economically, of course. But if we continue at the trajectory we're going, again, referring back to that number of we need to cut emissions by 7% a year. The current rate is completely unsustainable. I think from a technology development point of view, again, as our energy system moves towards electrification, which needs to happen essentially, and then the generation of that electricity becomes cleaner, I think the technology is already there, but it's going to improve massively. And I think there's never been an exciting time. And there was a case, I think it was 3 weeks ago in the UK, just to kind of show kind of at what kind of a turning point we are. There was a case in the UK, I think it was about 3 weeks ago. There's an energy company, it's a relatively small one called Octopus Energy. But over the bank holiday weekend, because we had seen so much sunlight and there was so much solar generation, it was a 3-hour window on a Saturday or it was a Sunday where their customers were being paid to use electricity. So just think about where we are now, where actually it was cheaper for the electricity producer to keep the solar farms running and generating electricity and to pay their customers than it would be to turn it off. So technology is allowing us to really shift our way of thinking in the sense of moving away from we need to use less necessarily because it's dirty energy. We're actually potentially moving towards a world where we've unlimited amount of energy, and that becomes quite exciting.
Perfect, thank you very much. So now we've got the second question from Sagar Galani, and I'm going to direct this one to Gopalji. So, do you think we are doing enough to help protect our environment as a Hindu community?
Wow, what a loaded question. You know, it's like, who are you comparing against? You know, the reality is like we can all do more, right? Even if you're doing the best, there's always more you can do. And again, that's at the heart of Hinduism, that we can always be a better person, we can always be more selfless, we can always serve more than we currently are. So I think there are some great examples of Hindu environmental activism in the UK, like the Bhaktivedanta Manor is a great example, the Balaji Temple in where is it, Dudley in Birmingham. You know, that temple was a wasteland, you know, before they bought it. They bought this wasteland and they made this beautiful, you know, ornate temple there. The Neasden Temple obviously is a leader in the space. And so there is a level of activism in the community for sure, but there's always more we can do. There's always more we can do. And I think comparing ourselves to others is never a good strategy individually or collectively, but we can all start with our individual actions and say, how much am I recycling? How much am I not using my car? How many flights am I taking a year? Can I reduce those? You know, so there's a lot more that can be done. And, you know, in India, for example, there's a lot going on there. You know, Hindu temples there have been doing so much great work for decades. The Tirupati temple is one of the leading environmental temples in India, the Puri temple, in the Jagannath temple in Puri, and so on. So there are so many leading examples of Hindu environmental activism, but there's always more that we can do.
Thank you, Gopalji, and Harshi for your insights there. I think your points on, you know, what the Hindu community is doing and the fact that we can always do more. I understand you're implying that, you know, Hindu students can hopefully do a little bit more as well. So we've got a question, and I think that ties in nicely to a question Keval Chavda has put out, and he's asked, how can our students champion the environment more on campus and actually begin to drive the change?
Yeah, should I take that first?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so it's a good question. Like I've been saying, we all have a part to play and we all have a contribution to make. I think when it comes to campus activities, I think first thing to do is just see what's going on your campus, right? There may be already major environmental campaigns going on. So for example, here in the US, there are big campaigns to force universities to divest their investments from fossil fuel companies, right? So there may be a divestment campaign already on your campus right now. That may be something you want to get involved with. It could be something smaller, like just making sure there's enough recycling facilities on campus, so you don't have to throw your rubbish in the regular bin, but you have you know, the recycling bins and so on like that. It may be something like, does your university campus have enough bike racks? So if you wanted to start cycling to college, that you have somewhere to keep your bike. It's like, it's very simple, but a lot of campuses struggle with even thinking of the basic things. So I think look around, find your environmental group, find your climate change group, speak to your geography department, find out what the issues are on campus already and see how you can add to that. But in addition to that, find something which is unique from a Hindu perspective that you can add to the conversation, that you can add to the debate. Maybe you want to advocate for more vegetarian meals in the cafeteria, right? Maybe you want to talk more about how animals are treated, you know, and you want to like start like an animal rights kind of discussion on campus. Maybe you are part of a university which has a medical department and they do animal testing, and you feel that's not aligned with your Hindu values, that all animals are equal to people, and you might want to talk about that. So I think find out what's going on, get connected to that, but also look within your own Hindu communities, your own Hindu background and traditions, and see what from there inspires you to want to make a difference as well.
Thank you, Gopalji. And I think you talking about briefly about finding out what groups there already are on campus and what everyone's up to is hopefully a good nod for those at home, some of our students, to really get into your Hindu societies on campus, and hopefully start something there or collaborate with other societies or departments at university. Harshji, your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think Gopalji gave a good list of examples there, and I think all I'd say just to add to that is really try and control the system that you can control, right? So what is the system that you operate in? So if you're involved in NHSF, the local chapter, I think it's already a great environment to kind of really try and make your impact. How can you make your society the greenest NHSF society there is, or the greenest university society there is? And what does a green society mean? I mean, you define it as you want, but measure and improve. I think it's very practical, right? And the other thing is just talk about it. I mean, you'd be surprised just how much impact you can have just about constantly talking about it. And it might annoy people, but eventually it will break people down. I mean, really practical example. I mean, when I first started working at Shell, the idea of my parents buying an electric car was just, they would never have done it. And I've broken them down, and now they actually own one and they love it. And, it's things like that. The more you talk about it, you will influence and impact people without even realizing it. So yeah, just keep talking.
Well, thank you very much. And I think that is a wrap. Time has absolutely flown by. So I would like to say an absolute great thank you, Dhanyavad, to Gopalji and Harshji for today's very detailed and magnificent session. And I'd like to kind of speak on behalf of the student community when we say we are very inspired to learn more about the environment and climate change. I think for me, the biggest takeaway will be definitely the application side, going into university and trying to make these really important differences which can affect our day-to-day lives as of the futures. Milan, what has your takeaway been?
Thank you, Davina. Yeah, just a few from me. So Harshji, you struck a chord when you said, we should actually be quite educated and well-read on the issue itself. And then when you said measure and improve, and yeah, Gopalji, from what you've been saying, the more Hindu philosophy side of things is when you actually challenged us to rethink the way that we currently live in a selfish society more so, and try and look after our Bhumi Mata and care for others around us, and especially getting involved in already existing groups, I think, and putting the responsibility on ourselves. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Milan. And finally, I would just like to ask Gopalji and Harshji if you could share your final thoughts on the session today. And also, I know one book recommendation has been made, but do you have any other sources of knowledge which would be great to share with our students today?
Sure. So I would say that, within Hinduism, there are two tracks. There's an inner track and an outer track. And the ecology of the world is a reflection of the ecology of our hearts individually and collectively. So if our hearts are dirty, if our hearts are polluted, if our hearts aren't clean, then the world that we create will be a manifestation of that. So let's do the inner work of cleaning our hearts and our consciousness. And by doing so, we can be more impactful in cleaning the ecology of the world as well. And the book I would recommend is called Hinduism and Nature. It's by an Indian author called Dr. Nandita Krishna. She's a leading Hinduism and environment scholar in India. And she's got 3 books: Hinduism and Nature, Sacred Animals of India, Sacred Plants. Oh, did you get that?
We got up to the book recommendations. Could you just repeat the book recommendations, please?
Sure. It's Hinduism and Nature, Sacred Plants of India, Sacred Animals of India. 3 books by Dr. Nandita Krishna, they're a great start to understand this world from a Hindu perspective.
Great. And yeah, I mean, final thoughts from me. First of all, well done, NHSF, for organising this, and a good topic to discuss. I think for me, the takeaway would be, you know, at this stage in your career as a student, you know, it's probably going to be nothing more important than choosing your next career path, which is completely justified. I would just say, set the intent and things will start to fall into place. So set the intention that you want to have a social impact on the environment. And then whatever career you decide to go into, make sure that intent kind of follows through, and things will just happen. But we've got to do it consciously. On top of the book recommendation, for those that are interested in a bit more of the technology side of what's going on in the energy transition, there are so many really cool podcasts that you should listen to. There's one in particular I usually listen to on my bike rides. It's called The Energy Gang. It's more American based, but it's some really cool, interesting stuff going on around electrification of our energy systems and things that you wouldn't even thought about happening. So I definitely recommend listening to that.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. And with that, again, I'd like to say a big thank you very much to Gopalji and Harshji for today's session. Also, a very big thank you to all of our listeners tuning in and participating. Don't worry if your question wasn't heard. We are noting them down and we will get them back to you as soon as possible. And on that note, I would like to say, please do share, follow, and stay in tune with all of our sessions planned. We have so many more refreshing discussions and opportunities coming your way. A final reminder, June Committee Day registration closes next week on Wednesday the 17th. So please do check it out. This is more for the newly elected committee. And if you do have any questions regarding this, please do just get in touch with anyone from National Committee about JCD. So with that, I would like to say a big thank you from Milena and I, and a big one last thank you to Gopalji and Harshji. So until next week, I'm wishing everyone an amazing evening ahead. So namaste and Shubhratri.